we'll go from there. Okay, sweet. So today we're going to be talking real quick about just an introduction to HTML and CSS. Okay, these are like two of the three. I think I have it somewhere in this document, four if you count PHP, but no one really counts PHP. Languages of the web. So HTML you can think of as kind of like the skeleton of your website, and CSS is kind of like putting on the meat and bones of everything. Well, maybe not the meat and bones. Meat and bones is your content. The CSS is more like making it look nice. So that way it isn't just a pile of skin and bones. All right, sweet. So we're going to talk about what they're used for, some of the basic HTML tags. We'll learn about that very soon. Their properties, how you can style those things, and then we're going to talk about our first project, which is a portfolio. You'll be able to build like your own website basically, just providing any kind of information for people to contact you, something kind of simple like say this, or like MatthewWang.me.
No, this is bad. I didn't put my website on the README on purpose because I didn't want to put it up as an example.
So you'll be able to hopefully build something that looks a little bit like this, something that you'll want to put out for the world to see. Okay.
Also, just to quickly interject, if you're watching at home, you can hit us up with any questions you have about the presentation. You can pause. I'll include the link to the notes that Leo's going through, both in the Zoom chat and also in the YouTube comments or the description. So you can read through the notes, and please contact me or Leo if you have any questions. And for people who are in the room, you can either ask us with your voice or you can type it in the chat or whatever. And please just make sure that you ask questions if you're confused or want to know more, because the whole point of us doing all this is to make sure that you all become pro web developers. So just keep that in mind.
Exactly.
Leo,
and
take it away.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so I think that I covered kind of a nice little intro here. So let's move ahead here. What is HTML? Okay, you probably have heard this thrown around before, and you've definitely seen it in any HTML file. If you're on the web, you'll see something that's like, oh, google.com/something.html, right? But here's what it actually is, okay? So if we're looking on some website, okay, for an arbitrary website, I picked Google. In the document, I picked GitHub, but you could do literally any website. You can just go ahead, visit it, right-click in your web browser if you're using Chrome or Firefox. They don't really have the best inspect element tools on like Internet Explorer, but I doubt you're using that. You can right-click anywhere on the page and click inspect element to see this. All the stuff going on right here on the left-hand side, and you can see in the screenshot as well, is what HTML is. All right, so what does HTML stand for? Well, it's the hypertext markup language, all right? So it's kind of similar to Markdown, the thing that we wrote this document that you're looking at on the left in that various important tags or pieces of text are basically marked up in HTML in order to provide various functionality or style them differently, right? So what you'll see on the left here is just kind of a mess of random brackets and text and just kind of garbage. But by the end of this, you should be able to understand what each part of this does. And that's kind of the goal. Okay, so going ahead, let's just kind of start talking about how we can make our own HTML file or HTML document. So files containing HTML code are called documents, all right? In the same way that this file is Markdown document, right? It's supposed to be easy to learn, it's supposed to be easy to read, and it's supposed to be a markup language so that any document that you have, Word document, PDF, LaTeX, can be transferred into this format fairly easily, right? But like a great deal of file types, like I mentioned here, they're still going to require a small amount of kind of unintuitive information to indicate what they actually do. So let's go ahead and create one. We're going to start right now. If you guys could open up your text editors. If you don't have a text editor, highly recommend VS Code. Right here. But you can also use literally any text editor, like even Notepad works actually on Windows. All we're going to do is just create any old file. We're going to name it in our case, index.html. And we'll find out why we name it that a little bit later. So I'll pull that down right here, side by side, our Markdown document that we're going through. And I'll just open it up over here. Okay. So now that we have our file created, is everyone all good on that? You can just give me like an okay or thumbs up or something in the chat. Okay, sweet, getting some okays. Excellent. What we're gonna do is add that tiny little bit that I said would be unintuitive to the top of your document. And that's Doctype Html, all right, with the open and closing brackets and an exclamation mark right there. And this tag definitely seems a little unintuitive, but all it really is just information for your web browser to recognize that the document it has just opened is an HTML file or an HTML document, right? So this is just basically information for your browser. It's nothing that's of much consequence to us. And as I mentioned here, it's not case sensitive. So if you wanted to, the doctype part is. So if I said doctype in all lowercase, it would have the same effect. Okay. So then what we're going to go ahead and do is declare a few basic areas of our code. And this is going to seem a little foreign at first, but you'll understand what they do very soon. So what I'm doing here is I've created a few areas, an HTML area, and you can just copy and paste from this document here if you go to the link that Matt provided for our notes. And we declare a few areas being HTML, head, and the body. And if we were to open this file up in our web browser on the right here, you'll see something like this. Just being plain text on a screen. Nothing fancy going on. It's probably in Times New Roman. It's very ugly looking, but we're going to change that all very soon. So I'm just going to give people time to kind of type that in if that's what they're doing, or copy and paste it if that's what they're doing. And recall that we saved this all in index.html. Okay. And I also have screenshots of all of this in the document for you guys if you're watching this at home and you don't want to, code alongside us. So going back to why we named it index.html, I mentioned that there was something special about that we'd get to. Well, the thing that's special about it is that the file name index is itself something special, right? So when someone navigates to like a directory on your web server or even on your local computer, right? So you can see right here, I've navigated to the directory live contained within our repo for all the nodes, right? The first thing your web browser is going to look for, or your web client is going to look for, is the file index.html. Well, why is that? It's because it expects it to be an index of the directory that it's trying to get, right? So normally, when you open a directory on your computer, like if I didn't have index.html here, let's say that I wanted to open just the repo, right? You'll expect a file that looks a little something like this, or a web page that looks a little something like this. A nice listing of every potential file that's in that directory, or every file that's exposed to the internet, right? So you'll usually see these sorts of kind of bare bones files or bare bones web pages on like FTP servers, places where you basically just go to download a single file really quickly. You don't need any more information, right? But if we wanted to replace that default index, right, or that directory listing, then we go ahead and create the file ourselves. So that's the thing that's special there. Everyone okay on that? Yes. Okay. So moving ahead, just one last detail before we kind of get rolling and really digging into the details is comments in HTML. They're a little bit weird looking. It's written like that. And in fact, let me turn off my font ligatures just so that way it looks a little bit more normal to you guys. It's kind of like an arrow to the left with an exclamation point and then an arrow to the right. So anything in here is a comment. Great. So let's go ahead and dig into making sense of this document that we've written, as bare bones as it is. All right. So HTML at its core is structured via things called tags, okay, which are surrounding plain text and or other tags. So you can see here that a tag is just, oh, whoops, that was not ideal. So you can see here that a tag is anything that's surrounded in brackets, right? So in this case, HTML is a tag, head is a tag, body is a tag, right? But not the column. And they're opened with just the name, and they're closed with the name, but surrounded with a forward slash at the very front of it, right? So in our example here, we say that the head tag is surrounded by head tags, right? So in this case, this is the head and this is the body, right? And as we mentioned, they can surround plain text and or other tags. So in this case, the HTML tag is surrounding multiple other tags being head and body, right? So everyone clear on that? Sweet. Okay, so looking back at this file, we can kind of break apart what each one of these tags is doing, right? So we have an HTML tag, head tag, body tag. The HTML tag is the most important one, and that's the root of the document. That's where every other part of your HTML document or your web page is going to be stemming from, right? And stemming from that, we have the head, which is where we put things that we would like the browser not to render to go. And we have the body, which is where we put things that we'd like the browser to render to go, right? So it's not guaranteed that everything in the head is not going to get rendered, but it's just something to bear in mind. Great, so we've kind of understood the three basic areas of our web page so far. And now what we're gonna do is start introducing more and more of these tags, so that way we can figure out how we can add more elements to our web page and make things look a little bit more visually interesting, rather than just 2 sentences in plain text. Great. So the first one I'm going to introduce here is H1, or rather the H series, I should say. That's because there's 6 of them available. So the H1 tag, written like this, notice that we just surrounded it with the tag itself, H1. Stands for a header of size 1, 1 being the largest and most bold possible, right? And what it does is it makes the text contained inside big and bold. So if we refresh our page that we have loaded up in our web browser here, we can take a look and see the change immediately reflected, and that is that the header is much larger, much bolder, right? And if we go down the list here, we go H1 through H6, they get progressively smaller and less bold, right? So if we look at H6 at the very bottom of our hierarchy, it's tiny. And you can do this in Markdown. I have it demonstrated here. And you can do the same thing in HTML, screenshot right there. So that's just something nice to know. If we wanted to make a title to the web page, we would do it with probably H1. Look at that.
Leo, I've got a question for you. Okay.
Sure, Matt.
I'm learning HTML right now. Okay.
What's up?
Is the point of the H1 to H6 tags just for the styling, or is there any reason that we would use them outside of just style?
Well, the reason that you'd want to use them outside of style is for hierarchical purposes of organizing your document, right? So for example, in our Markdown document, what I have is each one of these section headers is a smaller size than the one that's above it. That is, if I had like chapter 1 subsection B, right? Then the subsection B would be H3, whereas the chapter title would be H2. And when you're looking at this later down the line in terms of structure, you would be able to make sense of each particular subsection of each particular chapter, and it would keep it nice and orderly for you.
Okay, interesting. Just to add on to my own question here. The reason why I asked that leading question is because I want to emphasize something that's very important. So Leo mentioned this very early on. HTML is really about structure. The styles that come with it are convenient, but they're not the point of HTML. So the reason why it's very important to pay attention to things like H1 through H6 has to do with accessibility. So this is kind of a tangent. You're not going to see this in the notes yet. But if someone uses a screen reader, for example, so if they're visually impaired and they have the text read out to them instead, the screen reader goes through your entire HTML and looks for the structure of your page off of the H1, the H2, the H3, and the H4s, etc. So if you misuse them properly, so if your page doesn't have an H1, or if it has like mismatched numbers or there's no structure, the screen reader is going to get really confused, and the person using your website is going to be pissed. And screen readers are a non-trivial portion of the web. About 1% of all web page accesses are from screen readers, which is not a lot, but it's not nothing. And something that we'll talk about moving forward is we're not only going to teach you like just HTML and CSS like an online tutorial, because if that was the case, you could just watch one of those. We want to talk about best practices and really understanding why these things exist. So that's your little extra nugget if you already know HTML. But this is very important for screen readers and other sorts of accessibility related content. But anyways, exactly. Back to the paragraph tag.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah. So something that we wanted to stress here is that, yeah, we're going to end up trying to teach you guys about best practices in accessibility, especially because that is an important part of web development that not a lot of people end up learning. All right. So for the purposes of this crash course, though, which is grinding through as much HTML as we can in an hour, I'm going to just breeze through. All right, so we've talked about headers. We know how we can create a title on our page, and then maybe I wanted to make a subsection. Take a look, changes are immediately reflected. Nice. What if I wanted to add, say, a paragraph of text, right? I mean, obviously, I'm not going to just sit there and put it all like this, right? Or I'm not going to put it under an H5 tag, right? Because that just looks ugly. That's a mess, especially if you're using the headers for hierarchical organization purposes, because then you're going to have a subsection name that's huge. So what we're going for here is a paragraph, and the answer to this question is the P tag, P standing for paragraph. Keeps it nice and tidy. It's very simple. Use it like any other tag, and you can see what it looks like when rendered to the page, right? So we have our changes right here, immediately reflected on the web page at right, and I also have screenshots throughout the document just to show you guys what these changes look like. Okay, so everyone kind of clear on how headers, P tags work? Okay, sweet. So cruising ahead, we're going to talk about a slightly different tag, right? And that's going to be the span tag. And it doesn't really do anything special to your text aside from wrapping it. It's intended to serve as an area where you can mark up particular portions of your text or of your paragraph, right? So in my giant lorem ipsum statement that I have here, right, which is basically just copy pasta for web developers, we're going to go ahead and wrap some part of it in a span. And you'll see here, what I did is I nested this within the P tag. Recall that tags can contain other tags in addition to plain text, right? So what we've done here is the same thing as if I indented this to make it look pretty, and then indented it again, right? What I've done is I've just marked up an area. And that's the purpose. And you can see here, if we refresh our page, it has done nothing to the text inside. It's only there to mark a particular region. Of course, you can use it on your own, right? So on its own. So if we put a span underneath our paragraph here, oops, then it still displays the text as expected, right? But its general purpose is for marking things up. So. Great.
Leo, I have a question.
Oh, sure.
You just hit enter a bunch of times, but it didn't create new lines on the screen. What's up with that?
Excellent question, Matt. Yeah, so white space in HTML does not actually matter most of the time. And the reason I say most of the time is that in certain tags, in tags, spaces are handled, right? But your new lines don't actually register to it, right? So for example, like right here, I have a new line underneath the start of the p tag, and obviously it didn't reflect in the web page. And if I add a bunch here, it still doesn't reflect, right? So that's just kind of the point there. Anything to add on that, Matt?
No, you answered my question. I'm learning about HTML. I'm excited.
Perfect. All right, so yeah, it's not white space, it's not new line sensitive. And there's a tag I'll actually teach you guys after we get through this document that does create a new line. Just fun little piece of information. All right, great. So we've talked about paragraphs, spans, headers. What are some other elements we might want on our web page? You guys might have seen this because I was scrolling around, but does anyone have a suggestion? Something simple, hierarchical.
An ordered list.
Oh, wow. Great guess, Peter. Yeah, we might want something like a list, like maybe an ordered list, an unordered list. We just want a way of displaying, like, you know, lists of information, things that are associated with one another. And that's where these tags come in. OL, UL, LI. All right. Those are a lot of acronyms. So OL stands for an ordered list, and UL stands for an unordered list. All right. So if we take a look at these on our web page, let's just write some random text, right? Well, this is kind of strange, right? All it's done is indented it. Well, that's because for each item in your list, be it unordered or ordered, the item should be surrounded with LI, the list item tag. I did it again, oh my gosh. It should be surrounded with the LI tag for list item. So taking a look right here, if I surround my list item test with the open and close of LI. Now we have that nice little dot there. And if we wanted to change this list of random things, oh, here, I'll just copy and paste this a few times. If we wanted to make it into an ordered list, that is numbered, we would just change this to OL for ordered list. Easy as that, right? So again, HTML, it's about the structure of your web page, right? It's trying to keep things orderly for you. And in this case, we can organize things into lists just as easy as anything else on the page. So that's another one of the tags that we should go over. Okay, we've talked about a lot of things. And then the next thing I wanted to talk about is a div, a division. That is a part of your web page that you want to have distinct from the rest, right? Or for example, a section of your web page, right? If I'm scrolling through this massive document and I wanted to just hierarchically at least, right, in terms of structure, separate it from the rest of the document, this is where I would use the div tag, the division tag. So in this case, looking at our text that we have on the page already, I would say the two big areas, right, would be the areas where we use headers. So up here, headers and spans, and then the area where we end up using a list. And the way that we would organize these with division, with the div tag, is by simply wrapping them, just like that. And I'm going to indent it so it looks pretty, just so that way you can see that things are hierarchically sorted, right? And you can see if we were to wrap it with a div tag, refresh it, nothing happens to the page. It doesn't change anything visually, it changes things structurally. So I could add as many of these as I wanted to, and you can nest them as well, just like any other tag in HTML. And I'll indent this as well, just to keep it pretty. Nice. So now we have two divisions, a list, headers, paragraphs, spans. What are some other things that you see on the web all the time that you would definitely want to add to your web page? Maybe I want to, you know, direct my user to a social media account. Any suggestions?
Links.
Links, correct. What we're going to talk about is a hyperlink, all right? HTML stands for the Hypertext Markup Language. We're going to talk about hyperlinks. Okay, what tag would we use for that? Well, it's not hlink, it's a, which is a little weird. And in fact, I didn't know the reason that it was called the a tag until a little earlier this week. It's called a because historically it was used to denote the anchor of a hyperlink. That is where on the page the link lives or where it belongs, starts and ends, right? So the way that an A tag works is you just wrap the area of text where you want to link something with it. So let's say I want to link this last word. Actually, here we're going to go ahead and put it. Let's put it in this. Yeah, let's put it in the paragraph. Why not? So lorem ipsum. I want this to link to my GitHub account, right? Or maybe to my website. I would wrap it in an A tag, and you can see that nothing happened. Well, that's kind of strange. The reason that nothing happened is because we need to specify the page that it actually links to. Just wrapping it in that isn't going to do anything for us, right? And the way that we specify where we want this A tag, this anchored hyperlink to link to, is with a property. You can kind of think of it as like an argument to your constructor for some object, right? If you're coming from a traditional object-oriented language, right? Or you could think of it as a parameter to a function if you're coming from something functional, right? And in this case, the property is href. And I need to stop double-clicking on this document or else I'm going to confuse you guys. So here we go. So to specify the page that we want this to link to, we're going to just add a space after the name of the tag, right? And we're going to add href, the hyperlink reference, that is. And we're going to set it equal to the page that we want to link to. So in this case, I want to link to my cool website. .com, excuse me.
.com, yeah.
So I want to link it to uclaacm.com, and I specify as such in the hyperlink reference property of the A tag. So now if we refresh our page, you'll see you get this default style blue hyperlink that if you click on it, and I'm going to open the link in the new tab. Oh, it doesn't go anywhere because I didn't specify that.
That's not going to work. You need to do HTTP.
Oh wait, we don't have.
Yeah, this service down.
Okay.
No.
Well, excuse me. We're going to do HTTP, meaning that's just specifying that it's a place on the internet, right? It's not local to my computer. So reloading this, we look at it. Beautiful. We can look at uclaacm.com. Amazing. And if I wanted to link this to, say, my personal website, I could do it just as easy, right? So now if I refresh the page, bang, look at that, personal website. Maybe I could link it to my GitHub, my Instagram, anything cool, right? It's just as easy, you just change the hyperlink reference. Cool. So now we've talked about links, some other things that you might see on very standard web pages. Anyone have any suggestions? If Peter was, I think Peter might have the answer here again. Oh, he's running. Okay, never mind.
Back.
Welcome back, Peter. Do you have a suggestion as to the final thing that we might see on a standard web page?
Images.
Oh, amazing, amazing. It's totally not like we just scrolled through the document. Yeah, images. So if I wanted to show you a picture of my cat, right, on my website, how am I going to do that? I'm going to need to put an image in there. And the way that we put images into a HTML document is with the image tag. So underneath our list div, right, let's make another one. And in this case, I'll put in an image. And I'm going to just go like that. Simple enough, right? Incorrect. Well, first off, we need to actually tell it what image we want to put in, right? And then second off, we want to specify the text that we want to display if we cannot load it, all right? We were talking about accessibility a little earlier, right? And this is a big part, okay? You want to be able to represent visual elements on your page in a textual form so that people on screen readers or people who are just basically unable to see what you're looking at or unable to see what you're trying to display are able to get an understanding of what's going on your page. And that's where these properties come in. So, okay, how do we specify the source of the image? Well, we just use the src, the source property, right? And all we're going to do is link that to some image. So in this case, I'm going to just look up a picture of a cat. Let's go ahead and, well, first off, I want to be respectful. I'm going to get one that's labeled for reuse, just straight up. Amazing. Take this link here, and I'm going to copy the link location, right? Meaning the link to the image. And I'm going to yank that over here to our website, right? So the source for the image, oh gosh, that is not the source for the image. Hold on. There we go. Amazing. That's the one we want. The source for the image in this case is on the internet, prepended with HTTPS, right? And then the link to your file. In this case, it's a JPEG, but it could be a PNG or an SVG. And if we refresh now, you'll see that it doesn't work. And this is important, actually. The reason is that the image tag is a very small, it's part of a class of tags that are self-closing, right? Either that or for whatever reason, the image isn't loading. Okay, cool. So amazing. There we go. All right. Here's the thing that I'm going to get to. This is a type of tag that's self-closing. That means that it doesn't need to have this explicit statement here, and nothing belongs inside of it. So if you take a look at our list item, right, we put text inside of it, we close it explicitly. In the case of an image tag, right, what we're doing is we're closing it in the same line that we declare it. We open it and then we immediately close it. And the way that we immediately close it is just by moving that / that we use in the closing of a normal tag to the very end, right before we close it with that bracket, right? So it makes this very nice, simple little statement. And if we take a look at our webpage now, we have this amazing cat just staring right back at us. But we also want to make sure that if we're using a screen reader, we can still get an understanding of what we're trying to show here. And the way we do that is with the alt property of our tag. And the way we specify that is like we've specified href or src. You say alt equals, and then what we want to put inside. In this case, it's going to be some text. So I'm going to say a picture of the cat.
Okay, I'm going to take a quick pause to do an interactive activity, okay?
Sure.
So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to quiz each person in this call on what would be an acceptable alt tag and what would not. Are we ready? Okay, let's do it. Peter, you're up first. The alt tag says image couldn't load. Is that a good alt tag or a bad alt tag?
That's a bad alt tag.
Why is that a bad alt tag?
It is not what the picture would be. Like you want the alt tag to be like a description of the image, probably.
Okay, interesting, interesting. We'll review all these answers after. Nisha, let's say the alt tag instead is it sparkles. Would that be a good alt tag?
I'm going to say no.
Why not?
It also doesn't describe the image at all. I mean, I guess it does, but it doesn't like give you enough information about it.
Okay, interesting, interesting. We'll discuss this after too. Chloe, you're on the spot. The alt tag says, this image is an image of my favorite cat on the internet. I found it online after Googling cat and then copying the link, address, location, and pasting it into this image tag. Is that a good alt tag or no?
Not really. I feel like it's too long.
Interesting, interesting. There might be a trend of examples. Leisha, you're last, but you're very not least. The alt tag here just says a picture of a cat that's looking right at you. Is that okay or is that not okay?
I think that's pretty good. I mean,
why is that good?
Because it doesn't give like too much unnecessary information, but it tells you what the picture is, you know? So.
Okay, interesting. Well, big claps. I think all of you got your questions right. So big flex, big flex. But I want to point out some of the common mistakes that people make with alt tags. So A, you definitely have to have one for sure. B, Peter, I think you did a great job of explaining it. You need to actually have what's in the image. Saying placeholder image or image doesn't load does not help anyone if they're using a screen reader, right? Because maybe the image is a big part of your website. Like if your website is a cat blog, they need to know that there's going to be a cat there, right? Then Nisha, I liked what you talked about, because saying it sparkles with no context is also bad, because even though for us it's obvious because we're talking about it, for someone, again, using a screen reader, or if the image just doesn't load, they're going to be like, what the hell is sparkles? I have no idea what that means. Chloe, you're totally right. If the thing is way too long, right? Imagine someone's text-to-speech is running for like 3 minutes as it just goes through your paragraph. That's not very useful. And I don't know if Leah showed you this yet, but if the image tag doesn't work, you'll have like some random text show up. That's the alt tag. You don't want it to be super long. And then Leisha, you're right. A picture of a cat is just succinct enough. So this is the stuff that like we're going to try to differentiate ourselves from like your average web tutorial, in that things like alt tags seem like they're not very important, but they actually mean a lot. And they also change how Google ranks your website, which is the other thing. So even if you don't care about blind people, which I think you should, it does also impact how many people use your website. Okay,
This is true.
Sorry for the interactive interlude. Back to you, Leah.
Not at all. Yeah, so that's why we have alt tags. Okay, cool. So just to demonstrate what the alt text does here, if I try to link to an image that doesn't exist, in this case it's a directory, we just get the text instead. Nice. And also if you're going through it on a screen reader, that's what you get. All right, excellent. So moving on, the last HTML tag we're going to talk about is the link tag. We're not going to do anything with this tag quite yet. I just want to kind of expose you guys to it before we roll through the CSS section. What it does is it defines a relationship or a linkage from your resource or your document to another one on the web. So in this case, we could talk about, say, something like a font family, right? So if I wanted to get a new font on my website, or I wanted to, provide some resource that would allow, or some JavaScript library, something like that, right? Something to that effect. That's where we would go. Okay, so anyways, just quick summary. We talked about headers, paragraphs, hyperlinks, images, lists, divs, spans, and links. Okay, that's a lot of info. As an interlude to CSS, I'm gonna really quick, breeze over this concept, okay? We talked about how HTML structures your document, right? Well, the whole idea behind HTML and the relationship that it has to JavaScript, which we'll talk about later, is that it's tree structured. So if we look at our document that we have right now, you can see that everything stems from the HTML tag, right? And you can think of its immediate children, the head and body tags, as children nodes in a tree, right? So in this case, HTML would be the root, and its child nodes would be head and body. Then a child node of the head tag would be plain text. And the child node of the body would be this div and this div and this div. And each one of those would have their own children, and the ordered list would have 4 children, and so on and so forth, right? So in the document that we have here, we build a slightly different HTML file. I show you kind of what the tree would look like here. So just something to bear in mind. This will come in handy to have in your mind when you're thinking of an HTML document structure when you're working with it in JavaScript. Great. Okay, so before we kind of roll into CSS really quick, tags have properties, okay? We've seen a few of them already, being the src and alt of our image tags, of the href of our a tags, right? But there's also 3 that are, there's 2 that are uniform to all tags, and that would be class and ID. And they're used to specify exactly what you'd think, various classes of tags, right? Things that should look a certain way, and the ID of one special tag. So in this case, let's say that I wanted to assign the ID, big section to this div. Then I could do that just by specifying it like any other property, right? Right after the name where we declare the tag, we just provide the ID. And for class, we would go ahead and add it like any other. We just add it as a property right after we open the tag, or in the opening of the tag. Now, with IDs, you're supposed to have a one-to-one mapping, right? So If you give something an ID, it should be very important to your page. You can assign it to multiple things, although that's bad practice. Whereas classes, you can assign to as many things as you want. So in this case, you can see I named this class blue, right? Maybe when I apply the class blue, it'll change the text inside of it to be blue. Hint, hint, later down the line, right? And we can apply that to as many things as we want. Anything we want to be blue. Great.
Your question, Peter?
Sure. What's up, Matt?
Already answered.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Oh, what's up?
No, we're good. Okay,
Answered. Perfect.
Let's
Okay.
do this CSS.
I know we have 10 minutes to get through CSS. This is going to be crazy. I'm going to like really turn on the afterburners here. Ready?
Okay, wait. Quick question. Does anyone need to
Yes.
go? Does anyone need to go at 6?
I do, but I don't mind watching the recorded version.
Okay. So maybe I
Yeah,
should.
same with me.
Okay. I think I might take it at a normal pace then, just so that way it's still quality.
Okay, actually, then I'm going to quickly just steal the last some 5 minutes before we go to CSS. Just talk about the overall structure of this thing and the project, if you don't
Go
mind.
for it.
And then we'll go to CSS. And I
I'll
promise
open this up.
it won't be too disjoint. Okay, so first things first, how are we feeling about pacing? Is this too fast? Is this too slow? Because we can go faster. We can definitely go slower. Any thoughts? Okay, so I'm gonna give you a fair warning. The next ones are gonna hit like a truck. So lesson 2, which is one that I'll be doing tomorrow, is gonna be a crap load of stuff. So if you think this pacing is okay, I think everything else past this is gonna be just on the edge of too fast. If it ever is the case that we're going too slow or too fast, again, please let us know. We'll adapt everything around you. And we're gonna try our best not to just read off of the README. We wanna really personalize this experience for you. The next thing I'll point out is what's on this document, which is projects. So, you know, I mean, you could listen to us talk at you for like an hour, but let's be honest, lecturing is not the most effective way to learn something just that you need to practice, right? That sentence didn't make sense, but you can pretend it did. The idea is that we have to practice. So we're gonna do 2 very quick projects that A, are good practice, and B, also hopefully should be useful for you. So you can like flex it on your resume or put it on your LinkedIn or something. The first project we're gonna do is a portfolio website. So if you notice, you know, like Jason already has a very nice looking one. Leo has a pretty good one as well. But if you don't have a portfolio website, we're gonna have you make one. And so far, you've technically learned enough to have Times New Roman portfolio website with no layout, which is like, you know, the sexiest thing that recruiters want to see. After you learn about CSS with Leo and you go to my thing tomorrow, and then I think we have CSS Grid and Flexbox next Wednesday or next Thursday, you will have everything you need to know to make a website that looks like Jason's website, which sounds like it's a lot, and it is, but we'll get through that together. You're not in grade 3, as Arjun said, so we're not going to say your website has to look a certain way or has to use certain tags, but there are probably some things that you're going to practice. You're going to practice writing HTML, you're going to practice writing CSS. You're probably going to use things like, you haven't learned about this yet, but color, background color, margin, padding, position, you know, lists, links, all these different kinds of things. So we just want to get you practice in terms of making the portfolio website. You're also not in grade 3. We're not going to grade you or anything. We're not going to be like, wow, Peter, your website sucks. Or like Nisha, like A++, like you can skip the rest of the course, you know, no problem. We're not going to say that. But we kind of just want to give you a little bit of motivation and some frameworks in terms of what you can do. So we'll say, you know, right after this lesson, or if you watch the video, I would say just take some time, write up in HTML, in Times New Roman, in ugly font, the kind of stuff you'd want to put on your website with this structure. And then later, we'll go back and style it. Inside that README, there are a few other important things that we've included as well. So one is a list of cool personal websites, and this is really just me flexing people that I know. But these are all just cool people I know that have cool websites. Some of them I don't know, they're like celebrities. Other people are people I know personally. There's some cool stories you can see as well. But more importantly and relevantly for you, we'll also cover how to put your website on the internet. So, you know, so far what we've done with Leo is your website is just on your computer, and that's great, but other people can't see it. So we'll go over a specific way you can do that with GitHub and GitHub Pages. If you haven't heard of GitHub before, that probably means you're a good person from a CS major perspective. But also it's a really useful tool. You should really learn how to use it, and this will be an opportunity for you to do that. And then we'll talk about how you can host your website for free. And at the end of the day, you can put on your resume, hey, you want to learn more about me, go to peterflanders.github.io or go to chloeisawesome.github.io/blog or something like that. We'll flesh all this out. I'm going to set like a soft deadline and you should probably get some work done on the portfolio throughout this week and next week, because after that, we're going to really delve into JavaScript, and then the portfolio is not going to make as much sense. So that's the overall idea. Again, if you're super busy and you just don't want to make a portfolio, I'm not going to stop you, but this is one way you could practice your stuff. And I will guarantee that if you don't practice anything, then React is going to be really, really hard, because you're going to really struggle with some basic syntax and tag stuff and stuff like that. Does that kind of make sense? Any questions about portfolio, the task, leniency? Cool. Okay. Do you want to do me a quick favor, Leah? Do you just want to open one of like the simple ones?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. Simpler one.
Let's pick Marcel's. Can we pick Marcel's? I like Marcel.
Sure.
Marcel's cool. Marcel does a lot of Bitcoin stuff. He made a cryptocurrency where the validator is when you dab. So like if you dab in like the right way, they run a machine learning algorithm to figure out how you dab. And it's like fingerprinting, but with dabs. And then that is the Bitcoin thing as well. But this is Marcel's website. It's very, very simple, right? Nothing too exciting. But we'll talk about how to make stuff like this. I think this already impresses recruiters way more than having nothing. And controlling your web presence is better than nothing. And then Leah, do you also want to go to like one of the nuts ones?
Okay, yeah. Hold on. Carol's is kind of crazy.
Carol's is pretty cool. Carol is sick.
I feel like
now I'm just flexing about my friends. Wait, we can go to Carol's. I like Carol's.
Okay,
Carol's one of my friends. She is so smart that she doesn't even need to go to college. She just got hired straight out of high school, interned at Shopify, now works for like a crypto startup. But if you refresh her page every time, all the stuff changes. So different colors, different photo, different quotes, everything. And she also has this like slider thingy. So, she has her resume, obviously, like cool stuff that she's done. And you can kind of pick how much information you want to see from her resume. So if you like want to stalk her, you can go to the shit list category. And if you are just a recruiter who has no time, you can go to the less things thing. And so stuff like this is ways you can kind of add little personal touches, make your website super cool. And this is the kind of stuff where recruiters are like, oh my God, this person is a legend. Like, this is like better than a lot of professional software developers' websites. So she also is a professional software developer. She also collects Venus flytraps. But yeah, I would definitely recommend, once you're done this, read through that document, see how it goes, and give it a shot. If you have any questions, you can always ask us. But yeah, that's the end of my rant. I'll fill out the deploying your website portion like in a few days, and then it will definitely be ready a week before the deadline on the calendar. Okay, that is my blab on the task. Let's go back to CSS now.
Okay. Whew. All right. I'm gonna zoom through CSS, I guess. Okay, cool. Where were we? We were talking about classes and IDs, and now we're going to talk about how you can actually style things, which is like the important part, right? Because we're going to talk about how you can basically make everything on this website look a little bit different, all right? And we're only going to go over the basics of things, but Matt will go over a lot more properties that you can change in his next lecture, which will be cool. All right, great. So really quick, just looking over our website, it's obviously really bare bones. It's Times New Roman. It's got default links. It has a giant image of a cat staring down at you, and it's kind of spooky looking. It gives off a very odd energy, right? So we want to change that. And the way that we change that is with CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Okay? That's like a very strange acronym. But the last two words there make a lot of sense, which is just that it's used to style your entire website, right? And you do it with a single file or with a single language. So what we're going to do is learn how to read and write it, and then we're going to make a file that we're going to link to our website, and we're going to see how it reflects on everything. Okay, great. So how can we read CSS? Well, the way that it's read and written is fairly simple. So let's go ahead and create a file in our folder where our website lives. I'm going to call it cat.css, right? And I'm gonna open it up right here. And you can see here that the way that it's written, the way that it's read is really simple. You have a selector, then you have in that nest, so in this case, H1 being a selector, in there some property like font size with a colon and then its value, which I will say is like 20 pixels. Okay? And you can do that with as many properties as you want. So the selector is one of the things we just talked about. It can be the tag name being H1, right? It could be the class name like blue, or it could be the ID, like, what was the ID we used? The ID we used was big section, right? And then the value can be any, well, in most situations, it can be one of the, like, it can be one of the measurements that you're allowed to use in CSS, right? Now, obviously, the ones we're going to talk about are just the basic ones, but you'll learn with Matt, actually, there are a variety of things you can do in CSS. In fact, there's so many that it's a bit scary. Like if we're looking right here at the comprehensive list of all the things you can change in CSS, it's kind of ridiculous, right? So we're going to focus in on a few small ones and just how you can apply that to things. So selectors, right? We talked about how you can apply to tags. All you do is you just write the tag name followed by open squiggly brackets, right? Open brace. But we can also apply it to classes, like I said. And the way that we specify a class is by putting a dot at the start. So in this case, our class name was blue, right? If we take a look here, we made our spans with the class blue. And we can specify it by just typing dot and blue. Now, if I had another class, like let's say it was car, right? How might I specify that one? Well, that's going to go well.
Question to the audience.
Dot car.
Exactly, it's dot car, phenomenal. So we don't have a dot car on our page though, so I'm going to just get rid of that. We can leave it if we want, but for our purposes, I'm going to just keep it clean. And if we want to specify something with an ID, we would do so by prepending a hash to it. So in this case, it was big section, right? Yeah, correct. And in big section, we're going to make the font size huge. I'm going to make it 120 pixels. And going down this list, right? Each one of these properties has a specific value it expects. So in this case, font size expects some measurement of height or measurement of font height or font size, right? So in this case, we say 20 pixels. And you could use percentage of the viewport or EM, which is emits. You'll learn about those with Matt, but for our purposes, we're just going to use pixels. And then for the color, you can use, sure, a word like blue, but you could also do something a little fancier. You could use a hex code, right? So you could say like that, or you could use RGB if you wanted to as well. And the way that you'd specify RGB is with this and then the values of each. So 120, in this case, I'll just do 120 of all. And you can do that with anything that expects a color value, right? So each one of these has a particular value it expects. And we're just going to go over a few of the basic properties that you can customize with CSS. Then we're going to link the file to our webpage and everything will look a lot different. All right, so first property we're going to talk about is font size. I already broke it out here when we're customizing our H1, right? Made it 20 pixels. The second thing that I want to talk about was font weight, which is how bold something is. So specify all the same. The increments of font weight are in hundreds, and usually the default is 400. We can make it whatever we'd like. I'll make it 300, I guess. Actually, let's go 200. Great. So 200 means that the font will be lighter, the letters will be thinner, a little bit more difficult to read, actually, if you're using smaller font size. And then if you're using something like 700, oh, okay, later, Nisha. Later, Alicia. Take it easy. And then with larger font size or font weight numbers, it's going to be bolder and thicker. Great. Then the next thing I want to talk about is color, right? We already talked a little bit about this. You can specify it with RGB, hex, or just a word like blue or like gray. So in this case, let's go ahead and make the color blue because, well, the class name is blue. That's what we expect it to do. And I also mentioned here in the doc, you can specify it with HSL, which is hue, saturation, and lightness. That's a little bit more advanced. If you're into design, it'll make a lot more sense. And it's measured with degrees and percentages. I think for purposes of this, just focus on RGB hex and your named colors. Great. Then last two things, background color, it's pretty handy to know. If we wanted to change the background color of our big section, right? We would just give it that property and then some color value, right? So like what we did earlier, we could give it any color value. I'm going to give it an RGB of 120, 120, 120. These spaces here are optional. I just like to put them there because it's a little easier to see. And then the last thing to talk about is border. Now, I won't go too in depth on this. We'll talk about it in intermediate, but it's the first example of a shorthand declaration in CSS because looking at these properties, right, there's a lot of things that you can customize. And for the case of border, you can do border top, border bottom, border left, right, so on and so forth. And that's a bit difficult, right? It's a bit tedious. And what we can do in CSS is there's a lot of shorthand properties like border that allow you to specify things all at once. So in the case of border, it takes a format like this: line width, style, and color. And if you look at the MDN, Mozilla Developer Network documentation for it, they have great examples of everything. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and make a dashed red border like they do on there. So applying that to H1 means that every H1 tag on our website is going to have a dashed red border. Great. Okay, so obviously that's all fine and good, but we haven't seen anything reflected on our website yet. And that's because we need to actually link the file into it. And the way we do that is by breaking out the tag that I said I would come back to, which is link. What a link tag does is it creates a relationship between your page and some other resource on the web. In this case, the other resource would be cat.css or whatever file you made to hold all of your CSS. And the way that we specify a link from our page to another is pretty simple. We just give it the properties that it requires. At the very least, the bare minimum, we just need to give it a reference, an href, like any other link, right, to the resource, in this case, cat.css. But we also need to define the relationship, because obviously just giving it a link isn't going to really do anything for us, right? It's just going to get a file and it's not going to do anything. It has no idea what to do with it. And the way we specify the relationship is with the rel property. So in this case, style sheet, because it's a style sheet that we're going to be using. And then the final thing that we can specify in a link is the type, being the format of it. In this case, I'm going to say it's text CSS. All right, great. So saving all of that and refreshing, we can immediately see the Frankenstein's monster that we've created on our website at Right. These are the rules that we specify, and things do not look beautiful. I will not lie. A large part of this is because the big section has font size 120 pixels. Easy enough. Let's bump it down a little bit. Let's make it something like 15. Okay, well, that's a little easier to look at. So you can see here that things are still incredibly bare bone. They're not phenomenal looking, but it gives us an understanding of what we've done. The background color of the div with ID big section has been changed to gray. The color of anything marked with the class blue, these two spans right here, see them reflected? Span 1, span 2, has been changed to blue. And we've added a border around all H1 tags, being red and dashed. Again, not a phenomenal looking website, but it's what we've made. And then the last thing I'm going to mention before we go, I'll be 10 minutes over time, but that's okay. is the priority system of CSS. That is the cascading part of the acronym. We've talked about what style sheets mean, but last part is cascading, right? Because I don't know if you guys have noticed, but there are a few overlapping rules that we've created here. One of them is we have an H1 inside a big section. Yet both of them have special rules for the font size, right? You guys notice that? So there's a conflict going on here. And the way that CSS resolves this is via the cascading effect. It's done so in order of specificity. So in the doc here, there is an order of specificity in CSS. So if I target something by its tag name, that's the most general way of doing it, right? Because all H1s is a very broad statement to make. But if I'm talking about a class of items, that's more specific. And then the like most specific way we can go is with an ID, right? In this case, big section, right? So that is what resolves this conflict here. So looking over this, right? If we have something that has an ID applied to it, like if I move this ID away from here onto H1, then the ID styles win out over the type selector, right? So in this case, the H1 has these styles here, and the font size 20 gets overridden because of the fact that the ID is more specific. Does that make sense? Okay. And then, what was I going to say? And if we had multiple declarations of the same rule within a particular ID or class, so in this case, I'll change it to 20, the last one to be declared wins. There are ways that you can override these, but you should not do this. The way that you override it is with important, right? I'm showing you guys, like, this is like handing you a loaded gun right now. It's not what you should do, but it is something you can do. It overrides all later declarations. You should never do this. The only time that you should really need to do this is if you're using a CSS framework like Bootstrap, and there's a really specific rule that you want to overwrite. But even then, you really shouldn't use this. Because you can just take advantage of the fact that with an ID, it's more specific, right? And then you can overwrite the rule that way. So that's the last part of basic CSS that I think you guys should really know about. Obviously, the ones that I've shown you here are not all there is to it. There's like a whole lesson on this stuff. And if you guys want to find a variety of possible ways you could customize each element, you can take a look here at the bottom in my references list. I have a list of all CSS properties from W3 Schools here, which is phenomenal, about everything you can do. It is crazy. There's a lot of things to do with CSS. And Matt will talk about those at a later time. 10 minutes over. Nice. That covered everything in the README. Sorry that I didn't get to interact with you guys too much. I was trying to just grind through that very quickly. Any questions to kind of sum it up, or?
Okay, before we end the recording, just some things for both the people here and the people at home. Just to give you a heads up, so we're going to cover a lot more about CSS. This is probably the extent of HTML we're going to go into. I'm just going to verbally say that you probably need to know a little bit more to actually work at like a web development, like boutique, or do front-end web development. So just some things that I think you should think about. You don't necessarily have to research these, but things that are implicit, but we didn't explicitly talk about. So one, semantically, how can you name an HTML tag? That's one question you should ask. Another question you should ask is what happens if you write a random thing, like Matt and Leo are really cool, and just slap that in a tag name? What happens there? What happens if there's an error or a bug? What does the page look like? Is there a console? Is HTML compiled? And finally, last but not least, there's going to be something called Semantic HTML. I don't know if we're going to have time to go over it, but you should look that up if you're really interested. In terms of CSS, things that were implicitly talked about, right? How do CSS variable names work, right? Can you have spaces? Can you have dashes? Can you have underscores? Can you start with a number? All very interesting questions. We're not going to cover that, but the long story short is that it works like most other programming languages. Other questions like, do you have to end every statement in a semicolon, right? What happens if you misspell something? Is there an error? Is CSS compiled? Where do you see these kinds of errors? These are questions that we can answer in office hours, which you should hit us up in, but we won't answer directly typed in these like written readmes or lectures. But when you learn new languages, those are the kind of questions that you should think about, like how do they work, under the hood, what's really going on, and that also will impact how you, use these languages. Last thing I'll point out in terms of CSS specifically is that we can only scratch like 10% of CSS, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time on it already. So we're going to go over the stuff that we think is particularly useful for learning labs. So in particular, we're going to spend a lot of time on positioning things, since positioning content is really important. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on animating things, which is also important. We're not going to spend that much time on other things that are still important with CSS. So we're not going to go over things like gradient color effects, which are very, very popular. We're not going to go over things like box shadows or offsets. These are also very common things. But the idea is that from this lesson, you now know enough about HTML and CSS that you could just Google all of these things, or you know enough about the syntax and about the resources about where you can learn more, so that if you were curious, you can find more. That being said, we're also your resources. Please hit us up and talk to us for web development. Leo and I have both booked out an hour of our weeks, do office hours, and you can just drop in and say hi or do some work with us or whatever. We'd be glad to help you out. Yeah.
Just to reiterate, like the main goal here is that if you're looking at this, you can at least make sense of kind of what's going on here, right? You can identify, oh, this is a tag, right? You can identify that underneath it are its child nodes, if we're thinking about it as a tree structure. And then inside each of these tags is the option of text or another tag, and that there's classes of each and there's IDs of each, how that applies with CSS. Yeah.
Great. Okay, and because we're YouTubers now.
We are YouTubers now.
Like and subscribe, but also the next video is going to be on intermediate CSS, and I'm going to solo, unfortunately, go over layout and positioning. And we're going to slam you with a lot of stuff. Even if you've done web development before, I am uncertain if you know all of these things. And this is the kind of stuff that they would ask you if you were doing a front-end web development internship. So we'll go over, in particular, padding, margin, border, and the box model. We'll talk about box sizing, the CSS property. We're going to talk about inline versus block elements, which is kind of like div, span, all the stuff that Leo talked about earlier. We're going to talk about the position attribute with absolute, static, fixed, relative, and sticky. And we are also going to talk about the float property and why you shouldn't use it. But yeah, so that's it. Thanks for watching. Leave in the comments below if you have any suggestions for us. And be sure to subscribe. We're going to keep on pumping out content for you. And then, as I mentioned earlier, all the resources will be in the YouTube description. We're going to put the link to all the notes and stuff that we put and stuff like that. Okay. Thanks for watching. You can end the